Hi everybody, and welcome to our Smart Builders Week how-to session on helping building firms understand their CDM 2015 responsibilities, which is obviously a hot topic right now. I'd like to welcome Dave Price, who is our Health and Safety Consultant and Health and Safety Trainer.
Good morning.
Hi Dave, he's CITB accredited and NEBOSH accredited with a construction certificate, so he knows what he's talking about. Welcome also Ed Britton, who's our Business Support Manager, and I'm Jo Mulgrew, the Marketing and Product Development Director at HBXL, and we've been very busy familiarising ourselves with the new CDM, Construction Design Management Regulations 2015, so that we can pass on this very useful information to our customers. I'm going to hand over to Dave in a moment. But firstly, I think that the big question here, Dave, is how is CDM going to affect the small building firm? How is it going to impact him day to day? What does it mean for him?
I think the small builder now needs to be absolutely certain that that company knows how to complete a construction phase health and safety plan, because one is now required in respect of all projects. I also think that a contractor would need to get to grips with what constitutes a notifiable project.
So has the actual notification level actually impacted the small builder at all?
Well, notification now really is simply that. It's just a threshold for the project to be notified. It doesn't incur any additional triggers or duties on any person. But obviously it would be good for the contractor to know what that threshold is, because it's part of a domestic client's duty to in fact make that notification, and that duty then will now fall upon the contractor. So that contractor must know what the threshold is. I also think that such a contractor now should be very conversant with the completion of a health and safety file. This is the document that is handed over at the completion of the project to the client. So these are a few very basic things that the contractor now needs to get to grips with post CDM 2015. Okay.
I noticed on the previous slide, before we talk a little bit more about the role of domestic clients in CDM 2015, but where has the CDM coordinator gone? Where has the CDMC gone?
Well, it's a very good question. He or she no longer exists within the setup of CDM 2015, but those duties now, it is envisaged that they will be undertaken, in fact they will be undertaken by the person who holds the post of principal designer.
Okay, all right. So domestic clients then, and tell us more about what this means for the builder.
Well, previously under the old regulations, there was an exemption for a domestic client in terms of notifying a project. This previous exemption under the old regs no longer exists, and domestic clients now are clearly within the scope of CDM 15, and consequently they have duties. However, these duties will be undertaken, it is envisaged, and written into the regulations by either the contractor, the principal contractor, or the principal designer.
Okay, all right. So moving on then to the principal designer and your point there in terms of when they're engaged on a project.
Yeah, fairly simple. If the project engages more than one contractor, then the designer position is actually fulfilled by a principal designer, and the same thing if there being more than one contractor engaged upon the project, the person running that or in charge of that then becomes the principal contractor. So for single contractor contracts, it's a designer and a contractor. For multi-contractor projects, it's a principal designer and a principal contractor.
Okay. Well, I think it'd be good in a few minutes if we can kind of perhaps put some more flesh on the bones of that, because it's a bit of a concept to get your head around. But I understood what you were saying before about the health and safety file. So again, is that a similar scenario where there's only more than one contractor engaged on the project?
Yes, I mean the new regs do seem to make quite a clear distinction between projects that engage more than one contractor and projects that don't. And this is another case in point here where the health and safety file is only a requirement where there is more than one contractor engaged upon the project.
Okay, all right. And obviously as part of ongoing health and safety regulations, they've got to consult and engage with workers about the risks on site. You know, that's just that's ongoing. That's an ongoing thing. That's not a change, is it?
Well, interestingly enough, not a change, but I would say re-emphasised to a much greater extent in the 2015 regs.
Okay, all right. So let's go to a summary of the duty holders then, because I think that would help us all kind of understand exactly and who they are. So over to you, Dave. Okay,
well there they are. Clients have duties. Domestic clients also have duties, as I said previously, but a domestic client's duties will be undertaken by other duty holders. Designers have duties, and what you see before you are the definitions of those categories.
So, so in terms of the duty holders, can you go through those for us, Dave? So starting with the client.
Okay, well, a client is somebody who basically wants something built.
Yes.
Wants a construction project to take place. A domestic client is exactly the same, except that in his or her case, that is of the domestic client, then those duties will be undertaken by the contractor.
Okay. All right. And then, so in terms of designers, perhaps you could expand a bit more on that.
Well, basically, the client decides what he wants, or he or she wants to build, and engages a designer, somebody who's competent, maybe a member of a designer's organisation, to carry out the client's wishes. And that person is a designer. There may be a primary designer, people who design other parts of the structure, people who design kitchens, heating systems, cooling systems, would all be classed as designers.
Okay, so that's where then the principal designer comes in. So if you could expand on their role.
Okay, well again it's fairly straightforward. If there is more than one contractor engaged upon the project, then the appointment made by the client must be that of principal designer. And similarly with the appointment where the project has more than one contractor, the appointment is of a principal contractor.
Okay.
So it all hinges around essentially how many contractors are going to be engaged on the project.
Okay, so in terms of an average firm who are employing subcontractors, because a lot of our software users, you know, they may be building you know, home extensions, loft conversions, even new build, and they've got numerous subcontractors coming in and out of site. So does that make them the principal contractor if the client doesn't appoint anybody else?
Yeah, that will be a fairly common scenario, I imagine.
Yeah.
And the short answer to that is yes, that is what must take place.
Okay, all right. So in terms of the contractors, sorry, so those are the individual subcontractors. That's what that's talking about.
Absolutely right. Yes, they all have duties. People who actually carry out the work, they have duties. They must plan, manage, and monitor their own work. They must make sure their own operatives are trained and competent, and generally carry out their duties in a manner that doesn't make for huge risk. In other words, their task will be to minimise or eliminate risks as much as they can.
Okay. And then there's this other duty holder then, so the workers. So those are the staff, the employees of the contractors. Is that what
Yes, yeah, absolutely right. I mean, they've always had duties under the old regs and under all health and safety legislation, but here, under the new regs, they are, fully emphasised. People who carry out construction work as employees have duties to make a note if things aren't right, if they perceive there to be dangerous situations or events, to make that known to the person who's basically running the site.
Okay. All right. So looking at clients then in more detail, perhaps you could talk to us more about that. Because there is now this distinction by the HSE, if you visit the HSE's website, about commercial clients and domestic clients. But it doesn't mean commercial in terms of commercial works, i.e. I'm building a petrol station or something. Commercial as in not a domestic project. So it's almost like you've got domestic projects and then everything else.
You've made a good point about the distinction between the two. I think the simplest way to imagine it is a domestic client is somebody who's having something built which is not for profit, which is part of his own residence, his own home, or the home of a family member. Anything outside that would come into the category of a commercial client.
Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, tell us more about client duties.
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that, anybody that a client appoints must be competent and capable. So the client has a duty to make sure that he or she appoints competent contractors and a competent designer, competent principal designer. So
there's a real emphasis there on the designer or the contractor that's being appointed to be able to demonstrate that they have the wherewithal and are suitably qualified to fulfil those roles.
Yes, that's absolutely correct in respect to that particular client's duties, because the client has a duty, in essence, to make sure that the project proceeds with minimum risk to health and safety.
Okay. So what else does the client have to do?
Well, the client has to make sure that the project doesn't start until a construction phase plan has been drawn up. Mm-hmm. But probably more important than that is the client has to prepare pre-construction information for provision to the contractor and to the designer. And not least, of course, the client has to allow time, a run-in time for the project to start, and must put resources in the form of money into the health and safety side of the project.
I think that's an interesting emphasis change there, because it means that the client can't push the contractor, can't make things go quicker, can't try and skimp on costs and budget associated with putting the right health and safety measures, controls, etc. in place.
Absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, the client has got even more duties. So this is around the making sure that he's got these people appointed.
Yes, well, it's probably a little known fact, but the client does have duties to make sure that the project doesn't start until proper welfare facilities are put in on the site.
Yeah.
And of course, the client now has the duty of notification. Hitherto, that duty fell to other duty holders. But under 2015, the client has the duty to notify, if indeed the project is notifiable.
Yeah. So a quick question there, Dave. It's come to our mind that what happens with the domestic client then in terms of their notification? Because the domestic client responsibilities, as we're going to find out more, have to be carried out by somebody else. So who does the notification? Who would do the notification on behalf of a domestic?
Well, as I said previously, domestic client's duties transfer over to the contractor. So if a contractor is working for a domestic client, then, again, as I touched on earlier, they would need to carry out that duty on the client's behalf, or at least ensure that the client had carried out that notification duty.
Okay, all right. So yeah, let's expand a bit more on domestic clients' duties then. So we know that they've got to notify. What else, or rather that the principal contractor has got to have at least questioned that it's been notified, or do the notification himself. What else does the domestic client have to do?
Well, I think we pretty well exhausted the domestic client's duties, except to say that, you know, they are his duties, but they can be transferred on to, or they will be transferred on to the principal contractor or the contractor, or and the designer or the principal designer. So yes, the client has duties, but they can be transferred to people maybe who might have a little bit more professional knowledge than the client himself.
Okay. So what happens if the domestic client fails to make these appointments required by the regs?
Well, the regulations are part of the UK legal system, and they have legal status. So you know, anyone who breaches a regulation is liable to prosecution, and they're liable to enforcement action by the health and safety executives. So, to cut a long story short, if you offend, then you might be prosecuted.
Okay. So just to double emphasise then, so the designer in control of the pre-construction phase of the project is the principal designer, and the contractor in control of the construction phase of the project is the principal contractor.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure it's all going for us all day.
Absolutely.
It's quite complicated.
Yeah. New regulations do always take a while to settle in and bed in, and you know, so it needs to be correct.
Okay, so if we moved on then a little bit more about designer duties, and then moving on to principal designer. So yeah, what does the designer have to do in all of this? Because again, within our small building firms, often they may well try to take on a part of the design side of things, and that would be quite common, design and build firms, or maybe even modification of plans that that the client might have had done, you know, a couple of years ago. By a designer who's no longer in business. So yeah, could you expand a bit on the designer duties?
Designer's duties are absolutely crucial. The designer should be looking to design out hazards at source, eliminate them as a design measure. Where the designer can't do that, the regs are quite clear. The hierarchy says if you can't eliminate them, then they should be reduced to the lowest possible level. And any residual risks that remain within the build, he should provide information about those risks to the people building it, or if it concerns the after use of the building, information in respect of that. Okay.
All right. So he's then got this information for the health and safety file, I take it. So the principal designer is in effect. Does he start? Just remind me, does he start the health and safety file, or is it the client that's starting the health and safety file through the pre-construction info?
No, the principal designer would be the person responsible for, you know, collating the information for the health and safety file. If the principal designer doesn't see the project through to conclusion, then those duties pass to the principal contractor, who carries on the health and safety file duties and then hands that document to the client at the end of the project.
Okay, so that's quite an important new document, the health and safety file, but I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, but yeah, just emphasising that's something obviously that health and safety expert can help with. Okay, so principal designer. So you were saying before that there could be multiple designers involved in a project. You know, obviously the main project itself, actually the structure, but then there could be, I don't know, the underfloor heating designers, and I don't know, the air conditioning, etc. designs. And then there's this principal designer.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, this kind of took over from the role of the old CDM coordinator. And there's a certain amount of liaison and coordination in the role, coordinating the work of other designers maybe, in conjunction with the work of the principal contractor. So it is an important role. So as well as having the design function, this role has the liaison and coordination function between the other duty holders.
Okay, Dave, so who are the sort of people who could take on the role of a principal designer in a...
Well, that's a very good question, Ed, because as you rightly pick up on, it is a new position. The kind of competences I think that the inspectorate would be looking for in respect of such a person would be somebody obviously who's qualified in the design field, maybe somebody who has a professional membership to a design, an architectural organisation, but also underpinned with that, someone who has a really good working knowledge of the Health and Safety at Work Act and health and safety in general, who has a good knowledge of the hierarchy for risk management, elimination, risk reduction, isolation, and providing information. So some person who fits that bill, and it's quite a big ask.
So in terms of like designing and firing and forgetting, that's not really possible anymore, because I'm sure that there's lots of small designers who, not that they're, I wouldn't want to imply by any stretch that they're incompetent in terms of health and safety, but they can't literally just be focused on the pure design and then get it off their desk and on, to fire it to the client. They've got to be going further. Absolutely,
it's definitely a two-edged thing. The design now, there's the aesthetic element in the design, and there's also can the building be put up safely, and can it be used safely once it's been built, and that's absolutely crucial in this new role.
Okay. So I think Ed was speaking to us earlier about how to appoint a designer. How would a client go about appointing a designer, a competent designer?
Well, I get into Google and see people who put themselves up as being designers, and then ask questions. What's your track record like? Have you done this kind of work before? Do you know about elimination, risk reduction? And just maybe ask a few relevant questions for people who actually put themselves up to carry out this role. As I said, it's a new role. People are going to be putting themselves up vying to do this work, and the client should be quite discriminatory, really, in who he or she chooses.
So could a builder take on the principal designer role?
Look, I mean, a builder could. In fact, it's a question of competency. If the builder has design competences, health and safety competences, but he happens to be a builder, then there's nothing wrong with multi-competent person taking on that role.
Yeah. Okay. So again, the client has got to be looking at track record, appropriate body membership, perhaps, some health and demonstrable health and safety knowledge, as well as being able to actually design it.
I think that sums it up rather well. Yes.
Okay. So just then kind of confirming then, so principal designer duties, it's all about the decisions about the design, having a really big impact on whether the project is delivered safely. And I think you were talking previously about just emphasis on coordination between the parties.
Well, if you have 2 or 3 or even more contractors working on the project, then somebody needs to be responsible for coordinating their work, and that would come within the remit of the principal designer.
Okay. So moving from principal designer to the contractor side of things, so we're talking more the construction phase. Can you expand a bit on that side?
Sure, yes. I think the contractor now is seen, particularly in respect of domestic clients, as the client's friend, to try and enable him to go down the right legal route, to making sure that the client is actually doing things correctly. The contractor also has duties in respect of his own organisation, planning, managing, and monitoring the work. Planning, is every aspect of the work risk assessed? Are the right method statements in place? Monitoring and managing, has he got somebody in there to run the job for him? And is that person who's running the job competent? And not least, of course, now being able to put into place a construction phase plan. Now, certainly within the expert software, there is such a document. And so it would be a good thing for a contractor to get to grips with that, because now this document, this construction phase plan, is relevant to all construction projects.
So even small projects?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going in and I'm putting just a boiler, for example, into somebody's property, just the boiler,
Yes.
you know, interior.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that need not be a full plan, but there would need to be some construction phase plan. It could be maybe one of a shorter type.
Okay.
But you certainly still need one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess health and safety expert, just on that point you were making, it can help with those planning, managing and monitoring documents through the range of management documents that are in there, and just giving us a bit of a plug there on the construction phase plan, it certainly can do that.
Well, that is actually what it does, doesn't it? It assists in planning, it assists in management. It contains things like policies, construction-based plans, health and safety file formats, and many, many risk assessments, which people who've used it will know about.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's this note about appointing and employing workers who've got the necessary skills. That obviously continues to be.
Well, it's all about the competence word, isn't it? Anybody working now in construction needs to be trained and competent. Needs to have knowledge, and it's part of the contractor's duty to ensure that happens, even in the appointing of other subcontractors, as well as employing their own people.
Okay. So they've obviously, I guess it's a continuation of a theme from CDM 2007. But has the nature of competence in the eyes of the HSE changed?
No, not really. It's to do with experience, track record, and a bit of formal training, really. Formal qualifications coupled with, as I said, track record and experience.
Okay. Anything else on the contractor's duty side? Well,
it's worth noting that it's always been a contractor's duty to keep unauthorised people out of the site, and it's always been a duty to provide proper welfare. All that CDM 15 does is kind of re-emphasise it, and that's what I'm doing here.
Yeah, I noticed actually recently with the basement inspections that the HSE were doing that welfare actually came up. There's quite a high issue with those sites that the HSE weren't happy with. Something as straightforward as there being sufficient welfare facilities.
Well, there's no hiding place now. Every construction site needs proper welfare, and there are so many really good products, small units that you can hire in. Okay, they cost a little money, but they satisfy the requirements of the CDM regs for welfare, and better to do that properly than get some kind of fee for intervention a fine stuck on you for 2 or 3 hours work, which is going to cost you £500 or £600. So yeah, no excuse for not having it these days, whether it's in a basement or whatever it is. You just have to get on and do it.
Yes, yeah. Well, it seems a rather small, not a small detail, but it seems something rather basic to get pulled up on, I'm sure. Yeah.
Basic, and I would think annoying if it happens, and it could be expensive as well if you got pulled up on that.
Yeah. Okay, so a little more on contractors' duties before we move on to the principal contractor, about the scenario of when they're working for domestic clients.
Yeah, simple transference of duties. The duty transfers from the domestic client to another duty holder who would be the contractor. So yeah, that's it. So contractor now needs to concern himself with his own duties and the duties of the client. So it's kind of a double duty now for the contractor who's working for, say, somebody who wants a garage built on the side of his house.
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting things, or useful things, should I say, with the new Health and Safety Expert 2015 is that there's a couple of documents in there which the firm or the tradesperson can hand to their domestic client and say, look, these are the responsibilities that you have, which would pass to me if I'm elected or appointed as your principal contractor, just to emphasise that they understand the regs and that there can be no scrimping on a quote basis. It's better for a client to go with a firm that's aware of his health and safety duties. It's going to quote a little bit more for the pleasure of satisfying the regulations and just general health and safety.
Well, yeah, I think that document is important. Domestic clients frequently have minimal understanding of legal requirements, and they just want a garage built or their kitchen extended, and to be able to give them this document that is, as you say, in your software, to explain to them really what their duties are. But it's done in a plain and simple language. I think that's a really good, strong move forward to get the domestic client up to speed.
Great. Okay. So in terms of the domestic client, is there anything else that we need to be?
I think one way or another, today we've covered the domestic client fairly well.
Okay. So how does that move on then to the principal contractor? How does it differ from the contractor?
Well, the principal contractor obviously takes stage when there is likely to be more than one contractor on the project. However, as you can see, it's still a contractor's duties. So a lot of the stuff that applies to a contractor applies to this role of the principal contractor. So planning and managing is still in there, site inductions, keeping unauthorised people out of the site. We see it coming up, repeating itself, liaising with the principal designer, and the contractor's duties. So there you have them in a nutshell.
So Ed, what was your thoughts on the principal contractor to principal designer?
For me, my main question there would be what would be the handover process as the site transitions from where the principal designer has done all the pre-construction information. The principal contractor then comes into play once construction starts. What's the handover process?
Well, Ed, I'd say there were a couple of key things. One would be a kind of administrative handover where the pre-construction information was given to the principal contractor who would develop that into a construction phase health and safety plan. So there'd be that kind of an admin procedure, but there would also be a physical event which I would say effectively would start with like the first footfall of the contractor on the site, to carry out things like site setup, put in site cabins, maybe putting up of perimeter fencing and that kind of thing. And immediately that happens, then that is deemed to come within the remit of the contractor or principal contractor. So it's physical presence on the site really.
So in theory, and this is probably minor detail, but should the construction phase health and safety plan be in place before people are walking on site, putting security in, putting that cabin in?
Well, I'll tell you, Joe, it's very much not a minor point, and HSE are quite clear about this in interpreting this, that on no account must the construction phase start without there being a fully, or at least a reasonably developed construction phase plan in place.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, these are the kind of things that the HSE are going to be looking for initially, and I advise people not to start, contractors not to start, until this plan is at least commenced up to a reasonable level.
Yeah. So in my own thinking about a designer's role, that they would tend to do the design at the start. They'd be thinking about in the pre-construction information and designing safely, and then they kind of say, right, okay, I'm job done, I'm on to the next project. Over to you, Mr. Contractor or principal contractor. Can they walk away there? Can the designer therefore walk away from the project before completion of it? Can he say, right, yes, I've done my bit of the project. You paid me to do the designs, off I go, and what does that mean for things like the health and safety file?
Well, in that instance, the instance you just described, where the principal designer's duties don't continue for whatever reason until the end of the project, then there is, as you rightly say, a duty to complete the health and safety file for handing over, and that duty will then fall to the principal contractor to complete the health and safety file, assemble it. It'll have documents in it like as-built drawings. It'll have things like maintenance manuals for heating systems, to get that up together and hand that to the client at the end of the project.
Okay. So just summing up the principal contractor's duties then, it's no different then if he was building for a domestic client to a commercial client, really, except he's taking on the domestic client?
I think you've just hit the nail on the head. The duties are the same, but he's got additional duties with the domestic client because he's got the domestic client's duties as well as his own.
Okay. So where does notifiable projects come into all of this? Because obviously, I think we touched on this before, and we were talking about notifiable projects just being a threshold now, and isn't a trigger to do anything else and any additional work or documentation.
Well,
is that right?
you've summarised that as well as anybody could. That is the threshold for notifiable work. Okay. It's going to be lasting more than 30 days, okay? There must be at least more, must be more than 20 people engaged simultaneously at any one time, or the project exceeds 500 person days. But all that is really is the threshold for notification. It doesn't bring into play any additional duties on any person or any party. It just means that when that threshold is breached, the HSE have to be told as soon as practicable before the building phase starts.
That's a really big change, isn't it, from CDM 2007?
Well, it's big in a number of ways. The actual mechanics, the threshold is different, but also the fact that it's now no longer a trigger is different. It doesn't trigger any additional duty. So, yeah, massive change. And, people are just going to have to get used to this. And learn about it and know about it, and then work within it really.
Okay. So pre-construction information, that's nothing to do with notification in any way.
No.
So can you tell us about?
But it is important. This is something the client needs to bring together. Pre-construction information, so that when they're meeting with contractors, the contractor knows what he's likely to encounter within the project. There might be things, for instance, like presence of asbestos. There might be things like contaminated land if you're building on the site of an old garage. Pre-construction information, something that the contractor must know about, essential for him to get to grips with that information when he's carrying out his plans for constructing the project.
Okay. So pre-construction information, so it doesn't sound actually like it's a document, but this is actually a document that's got to be prepared with information about the project before building starts. So it is an actual document. It
is an actual document, and if you look at the CDM regs, they give you a clue in there, or not a clue, but actually it's a mandate to say these are the things that you must include. And it just happens again that your expert software contains a format for this information, which you could apply to any project. It's very useful.
Okay. So the emphasis here is the client providing that information, and does that include that? I'm probably asking again a deliberately silly question, but if this is a domestic client providing this info, presumably they still have to be, because the contractor might not be involved at this early stage where they're doing design.
Well, it is a client duty, but if they've appointed a designer, then the designer ought really to be helping them and assisting them in that role.
Okay.
And certainly, if they've taken on board a contractor, and then that contractor should be wising them up to what would be necessary within that paperwork. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of the evolution of that pre-construction info, is it like a living document then? Is it kind of organic? Does it grow, get bigger?
Well, it should be. There should be a development of it, and eventually it will kind of. It's not a very good choice of words, but it'll kind of morph into what will become the construction phase health and safety plan.
Yes.
So that you would develop the health and construction phase plan from this pre-construction information.
Okay. And then that is going to include information that will go into the...
Yeah, I mean, you might need to look at the existing health and safety file for the existing building. If the project is to do with adapting or altering an existing building, look at the previous health and safety file, which have been put together under the old 2007 regs. Look at it and see, what's in it. What are the residual risks that are identified in that file? Yeah.
Okay. All right, and so just underlining, so when must the pre-construction information be, in what example of what projects should the pre-construction information be put together?
Everything, all projects. There are no exemptions for the provision of pre-construction information. It's an essential element in all projects.
Okay.
No triggers, no provisos, client's got to do it.
Okay, and so this point here about there being more than one contractor, can you expand on that at all? So that has nothing to do with whether or not the document should be prepared or not, it's just about who's doing it? Or?
That's to do with who's going to take possession of it. If obviously it's a multi-contractor project, there's a principal designer involved in that, as we've discussed previously, and so this information then should be given to that person holding that office, the principal designer.
Okay. So then that leads us nicely to the construction phase and health and safety plan, which is nicely for us another document that health and safety expert will help with the preparation of. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, it's a kind of living document that starts on day one of the project, and it has information in it like how site inductions are carried out, what we're going to do about managing traffic on the site, what our risk assessment, how we're going to carry out risk assessments, identifying the main hazards, the main risks, and basically what we're going to do about it. And also on that previous slide, I noticed site rules. There was a little piece on here. Would you? Yeah. Site rules. Well, again, that's something that's quite important for to be present in a construction phase.
Sets the tone, I guess, for how the project's going to be
very much
safely.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's all about communication, getting everybody in the project.
Yeah, very much so. How we're going to plan and how we're going to manage the risks. Risk management is essentially not a great deal of difference in 2015 with the old regs, but how are we going to manage risks? Risk assessment.
Yeah. Again, health and safety expert, if you're interested, people listening, it also does risk assessments, produces them for you.
I've just actually lost count of how many risk assessments we have in.
I believe there's about 150 or so in there, and plus I think there's 130 odd cost documents in there, cost risk assessments as well in there.
It's got to be helpful, doesn't it? Really?
Absolutely. So I noted on that slide also that it's just emphasising a construction phase health and safety plan is now required for all projects, no matter what size, no matter whether they're notified to the HSE. It should be in place for every project.
There are no exemptions to the requirement for a construction phase plan. What the regs do envisage is that some projects are more complex than others, and there may be grounds for two kinds of level of plan: a complex plan, what you might term to be a kind of a simpler plan.
Yeah. Okay.
So heavy paperwork and not so heavy paperwork.
So can I run through a couple of examples? Well, actually, maybe I've got two or three actually. So a plumber installing a new boiler in someone's house.
Oh, I think that would be a shortened plan, a simple plan. It's not a huge
one
job.
that is required all the same.
You got to have it. Yes, you need it.
And what about a joiner doing a kitchen fit out? Does he need one?
Well, there's big kitchens and small kitchens, aren't there? Does it involve demolition of part of the kitchen? Now, I think you need to be a bit careful with that one. If it's a simple domestic kitchen, I'd say, fitting, I don't know, half a dozen units and a cooker and things, I'd say simple plan. If it's a massive kitchen involving walls being knocked out, I'd say, big plan.
And you still need a plan. It's just you do need a plan. You do need a plan.
You need a plan. No, you need a plan.
Yeah.
There are no exemptions.
Yeah. So home extensions and lots.
Well, it's either going to be a big plan or a small plan, depending on whether it's a big or a small extension. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess then it's about it being proportionate to the.
I think proportionality would be the key word there. You don't need to have a 100-page document if you're fitting a central heating boiler.
Yeah. Incidentally, the construction phase plan with health and safety expert isn't a 100-page document. Don't worry. It's,
No, it's not.
It's all about. I think you're going to be talking about, keeping it relevant to the project, keeping it tight about the information that's pertinent to this particular project. Right. Okay. So remind us again, who's responsible for this document?
This is the domain of the principal contractor, if there's more than one contractor on site. If it's a sole contractor-led operation, then it's the contractor's domain to have this document commenced, kept up to date, frequently reviewed and updated throughout the construction phase.
Okay. So we've done pre-construction, we've done the construction phase, and then we've got project completion where we've got handover. So does this fall into the domain of the health and safety file and needing this particular document?
Yes, again, where there are multi-contractors on site, there is a requirement to complete the health and safety file. It is to do with the kind of afterlife of the building, any residual risks and hazards, and that will be handed over to the client when the job is finished by. Normally that will be the principal designer, but as I said previously, if he's left the project for whatever reason, then the principal contractor in charge of that project will hand that document to the client at its conclusion.
Okay. And luckily, health and safety file is another document that Health and Safety Expert 2015 can help people prepare. Okay. So is there anything else that we need to say about the health and safety file?
No, except as I mentioned previously, you need as-built drawings in there, any maintenance manuals that concern things like central heating, air conditioning, any key structural elements to what you've just built, like if you're going to consider demolition in the future of a bit of it, is there some kind of sequence that you need to carry out to do that safely? Or if you use any special products like floors that need special cleaning measures so that they don't become slippery. This is the kind of information that goes in this document, the health and safety file, at the end of the project.
Okay.
Very important document.
I've got a couple of questions on this one, Dave. First of all, what are the penalties for not producing this documentation?
Well, it's quite simple, really. As I said previously, it's a breach of the criminal law. You could end up in the magistrate's court with a maximum fine of £20,000, which might be accompanied by an imprisonment term of 12 months. But you might be actually transported into the Crown Court realms, where obviously the maximum is increased. So there's an unlimited fine at Crown Court and a maximum of 2 years imprisonment for health and safety offences.
And one other question, the health and safety file, is this still relevant in a domestic job environment?
Yes, it's relevant in any environment where there are multi-contractors involved. The threshold for this is multi-contractor. If it's a single contractor, no need for the health and safety file. But
I guess here, just to emphasise it, if you're talking about most building firms doing something like an extension, there's almost always going to be multi-contractors, isn't there? There's going to be, someone like the electricians or the plumber coming in or the plasterer that's subcontracted out. That constitutes multi-contractor, isn't it? Even though it's one main firm managing it, that will still require that.
Absolutely, yeah. Correct. Yes.
And I guess kind of commenting on from Ed's point about other penalties for not producing the documentation, I guess a lot of people are going to think, well, how on earth is it going to be policed? Does my project have construction phase health and safety plan? How are they going to know if I've done that or not? Which I can understand the sentiment, but I guess it's going to be you've got to keep clients, the homeowner, etc., safe during construction. But I guess the cynical person would say, well, it's really only going to be when the HSE come knocking and do a spot check on the site, or there is actually a problem, there's a genuine accident that occurs on site, and this documentation is not going to be in place. That's where people are going to get caught out, I guess.
Look, the HSE carry out their duties in one of two ways. It's either a proactive visit, which means that they'll turn up at the site or at your offices and ask you questions, or it'll be reactive. And as you rightly say, reactive would be in response to some kind of a complaint or an accident.
Yeah.
And but the HSE are fond of proactive measures. They visit people, and they are likely to ask you as a contractor questions in respect of CDM 2015.
Yeah.
Is it working for you, and are you doing the right things?
Yeah.
And look, it's not for me to forecast how the HSE are going to deal with this. Should they deem to be pleasant about it and say make a short honeymoon period where they might perhaps write you a letter or offer you advice, eventually the time will come when they will be exemplary. They will want to make an example of people who persistently fall by the wayside in respect to their duties. So I'd say ignore it really at your peril.
I noted the other day on HSE website, I think it was, that they said 70% of the HSE resources were actually focused on SME, and that's small to medium building firms at the moment, which is obviously a fair amount of focus. So,
and you have to ask the question, why are they focusing in that area? And the answer is probably going to be because they sense that these are the areas, where most of the non-compliances are occurring. That's just my view.
Yeah.
I have no evidence to suggest that, but it's a fairly logical thing. If they're going down that road on enforcement, then they feel that's where the main energy is needed.
That's a sensible assumption, I would expect. So a little bit more about the appointment of the PD and the PC. So PD being principal designer and PC being principal contractor. Is there anything else that we need to say?
I think we've covered that, to be honest. I mean, I can't say a great deal more about that. These two positions kick into being where there is multi-contractor project. You don't need a PD or a PC if there's only one contractor working on the project. And I think that's the end of the story there, really.
Okay. So, principal designer, right at the start, principal contractor, and obviously needs to be in place before construction. If there's no principal contractor, there can be no building work going on.
Right. Okay. But this is interesting. What's there before you now? Because it's what that's saying is, in default, if the client fails to make these appointments, which is a legal requirement, which he has a legal requirement to do, then the client, that person, must fulfil the duties. And quite frankly, how many clients do we know who have the competences and qualifications to be either of those, to fulfill either of those roles? And I think this is just a bit of pressure on the client to say you have to make these appointments.
Yeah.
If you don't, then you're going to become them, and that would be enough. Certainly frighten me if I was a client.
But say taking the contractor there, he can't feign ignorance, saying, "Oh well, the client, he was taking responsibility as being principal contractor because he didn't appoint me."
I don't think the contractor can feign anything, particularly if the contractor is working for a domestic client. He's actually got the client's duties put onto him. So there's no kind of quick escape route for people, washing their hands and saying, "Well, nothing to do with me, John."
Yeah.
The contractor is going to be inextricably bound and linked into this.
Okay.
Inheriting duties. That's not the right word, inheriting, but getting duties from the client. So I don't think you can't sort of pass by on the other side of the road and imagine this doesn't apply to you, because it does.
Okay. Well, that's cleared that up there for me. So a few points, I guess, in general about how health and safety expert is going to help you with general principles of prevention. That's obviously what all firms have got to be operating under. This is what they've got to
Well,
do.
these are interesting because they're so clearly defined in the new regs. I mean, they kind of emanate from without being too technical, the management regs, which deal with risk assessment. But this is a kind of a hierarchy for dealing with risks. And it's fairly simple. Avoid risks where you can, eliminate. If you can't do that, evaluate them, which really means carry out a risk assessment. Combat the risks at source, design them out. Use a different product. Don't use something that's dangerous, use something that isn't dangerous. And then adapt your work to the individual. If you design a workplace, adapt it to the individual. These are all the elements of the general principles of prevention, of risk prevention. Use technical progress, nets, airbags, beanbags, anything to minimize or mitigate the effects of a fall. Replace the dangerous with the non-dangerous and the dangerous. And have some kind of an overall strategy that says, we're conscious that we need to be doing this. And let's involve the views and opinions of our workforce in combating risks and bringing into being risk combating measures. Anything that's collected is better than an individual. A net is better than a harness. A net is a passive measure. You don't have to worry about clipping on with a net. If you fall into a net, it's there, it's properly constructed. An individual protective measure might be a harness, but somebody has to be thinking about clipping that onto some kind of an anchorage point. It has to be fitted correctly. And don't forget the last one, please. If you fail to train and instruct people, they'll probably do it wrongly. They'll probably do it incorrectly. And if you say, well, it's common sense, well, you do need to give instruction, training, information, instruction, training, and supervision. These are highlighted now in the new regs of 2015. They've always been there, but it's greater emphasis.
So, if we moved on to some good practice for designers then, I know that you were kind of interested to talk this through, Dave. So what is RAG all about? Okay,
well, I obviously won't go through the whole system, but essentially red would signify things that we never want to see designed in or happening on a construction site. Amber, well, we could just about countenance them, but we'd like to make them safer if we could. And green are things that we definitely want to see on a construction site. So red, amber, green, RAG, and there are lists. Now, I'm not going to go through them all, just highlight a few maybe, but these are the things that obviously we don't want to see. And if I just take you down and isolate bullet number 4 down the page, people specifying fragile roof lights into roofing assemblies. People fall through them with with frequency. It happens. It happened last year, it'll happen next year. So anything on that list, don't countenance it on your site. Don't design it in. Avoid it, okay?
So where did these particular lists originate from, Dave? Is this something that people can access? It's obviously outside of health and safety software.
Well, the easy way to do it is just Google, a RAG list. They came off it was either the CITB or the HSE website. So these are not my ideas. They have formal approval with the CITB and the HSE. But just get into Google, stick it in RAG lists, and they'll come up.
And then there's the amber.
There's the amber, the amber, yes. Okay, so just trying to pick one out. Have a look at the bottom one. The use of large piling rigs and cranes near live railways and overhead electric power lines, or where proximity to obstructions prevents guarding of rigs. Well, if you can avoid that, you might be able to. The job might demand that you do that. But if you could avoid that, then they say, do the work in some other way.
Okay.
Obviously, you can't move the site. If you're near if you need near a power line, then you're near it. But you may be able to use a different method.
Okay. And then there's the green list that.
Well, there's everything on here that you would want to find on a well thought out and well run construction site.
Okay. As in designed in the first place.
Design it in the first place. Just have a look at the first one, just for the just have a look at it. Make sure that you have adequate access for construction vehicles. Minimize reversing. Okay. Use the one-way system if you can. Use turning circles. And you'll have a safe transport system on your site, and many others that go with that. So red, amber, green. Look for the green. Go for the green every time.
Okay. So I think something people are going to be interested in is about any transitional arrangements. How long have people got to get to grips with this? And presumably they should be familiarising themselves with it now. But what about projects that have already started? What happens?
Projects that are, well, I can't put it any clearer than that, really. You know, if you begin your project before the 6th of April, okay, then and it continues beyond that date, and you don't have a coordinator in place, then there must be appointed a PD as soon as possible, if the construction phase hasn't started. But if you started the construction phase,
right, yeah,
then you have a choice about whether you do that or not. I mean, I can't really put it any clearer than that. If you haven't a PD appointed, then the principal contractor will take on the responsibility for the health and safety file. We discussed that earlier. And any designer involved with the project should provide information about any residual risks in designs to the principal contractor. So that's fairly, so far, fairly clear. Have a look at the bottom one there. The client must appoint a PD within 6 months. So we have until the 6th of October this year for this thing to be fully up and running with all the new duty holders in place and carry it. Well, they've got to carry out their new duties now. So the regs have taken effect, but we have 6 months to get these people in post.
Okay. So before we close, perhaps we could just have a quick look at the, Ed was keen that we put some flesh on the bones of a few scenarios. Or would you like me to run through those? Because I'm thinking, I'd like to know, personally, I mean, a design and build firm, that's fairly common, although I think probably put it to general building is more common within our building, our firm, certainly within HBXL, who we sell software to.
These are the typical sort, but the majority of our customers, certainly people who are looking at using the health and safety expert and also some of our other products.
Yeah, yeah.
These are sort of the customers that we tend to deal with on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to someone doing major data engineering.
Okay. Design and build, well, design and build is okay. A contractor who has competences in the design field and is a competent contractor you can have dual role. You can be the designer, the principal designer, the contractor, or the principal contractor, all combined. In fact, if a building company wanted to extend its own building offices, it could actually be all three duty holders. It could be the client, it could be the designer or PD, principal designer, and it could be the principal contractor. So it's to do with competences rather than individuals.
So in that scenario, then they're responsible for the pre-construction information, construction phase, health and safety plan, and the health and safety
everything,
file.
yeah, everything.
Okay. And so a general builder then, so he's not involved with the design side, he's just doing the building, he's had some plans handed to him. So presumably he's got to take the responsibility on, as long as that's a domestic client.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? If the general builder is working for a domestic client, he has to now assume those duties, the domestic client's duties. And part of that duty is, for the domestic client, is to appoint, as we know, a designer or a principal designer. So the contractor is going to have that duty put upon him. So he's not really in a position to say that's your duty, client. I don't want to get involved in that. So I see that general builders having to be more involved in the whole process of pre-construction and appointments where they work for domestic clients.
Okay. So in that scenario, then they need to make sure that the client has appointed a principal designer, and if they haven't, to put one in place.
Very much so, yes.
To make sure that then that pre-construction information is flowing through. They've got to make the notification to the HSE.
Very much so.
Construction phase plan has got to be put in place, and either complete the health and safety file, or get it passed from the principal designer on if they're still involved with the project.
Absolutely right.
So you see, so a subcontractor, so I don't know, a plumber or an electrician, then
Well, the thing about a subcontractor is, he is a subcontractor, but he is a contractor. So you then need to go back to, rewind a few minutes and think about contractors' duties: planning, managing, monitoring his own work. You know, providing risk management.
Yeah.
So he very much, the subcontractor has the duties of the contractor.
Okay, so all of those things, the risk
Yeah.
assessments, the cost assessments, the planning,
Yeah.
the management documentation, all of that, again, I guess.
Needs to be undertaken, yeah.
Got to be undertaken, and you can use health and safety expert
Yeah.
for that. And maintenance firms.
Maintenance firms carry out what is defined as construction work under the CDM regs. Therefore, they are within the scope of CDM regs.
So they're effectively just a contractor, aren't they?
They are a contractor.
Yeah. So they've got all that same involvement.
They do have the same. They do have the same degree of involvement and the same duties and the same responsibilities as anybody else.
So going in and doing kind of fairly small jobs on a site or a home, they've got to be producing that construction phase plan. So I know, Ed, you've seen a lot in forums and all over the web.
There's been a lot of talk about what's the difference between a job and a project, and it would seem that there is in fact a job and a project as far as CDM 2015 is concerned, are exactly the same thing.
I'd have to agree with you, Ed. They are. However, I think the HSE have come out now and said, we don't expect necessarily a lengthy plan for a very small project. Going back to those scenarios. So complex project, complex plan, simple project, maintenance work maybe, simple plan. Okay.
So I guess it's probably worth starting to round up with a slide about the penalties for non-compliance.
Yeah, well, that's all a bit frightening, isn't it? What's up there? That is frightening. We've mentioned if it gets to court, but let's talk about the third bullet down. If it doesn't get to court, you get a visit from the HSE, and they intervene. They don't take you to court, but what they do, they write you some correspondence to say you haven't quite got this right. And that's chargeable at the rate of £124 an hour. How many of those do you need before your business starts to waver? Get it right.
Yeah, I mean, I think with those, the basement sites, spot checks, where there was 50% of them failed their check. I mean, a good number of them, the sites are actually either closed or they had to just stop work until they'd remedied the problems on site. So I guess that's not even about the threat of fines or anything. It's just work has got to stop, and time is money. If your site's shut down or paused, you can't be cracking on.
Difficult to put a price on that, isn't it? Things like a prohibition there to stop the site. How do you cost that out? We don't know. It's indeterminable. But what I do know is that it very often is cheaper to get it right than it is to get it wrong.
Yeah, well, it was suggested though in fees for intervention that there was 990 or so fees for intervention invoices sent just to construction firms, and they were worth nearly $500,000 when they were sent in December 14. So I think it seems that the HSE is in the swing of things now, so far as fees for intervention.
I like that phraseology, in the swing of things. You mean they can easily target people perhaps who they sense may not be going to be getting it right, because I see the basement things come up again.
Yeah.
Here, so clearly people who carry out basement refurbs, for some reason, are more prone to getting it wrong than other people.
Yeah.
And as you say, that would be getting into the swing of it.
There's also significant hidden cost, which is if you did have a visit from the HSE and you had a prohibition on the site, or the site was halted, there's a significant loss of face to your client there, which may mean no further repeat business either from the client, or that client will certainly not recommend you if you've actually failed to demonstrate good competence.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with you. How do you put a value on your reputation? And all this stuff is in the public domain. You can find out who was prosecuted for what and when. So it is your reputation as a contractor, and it's very difficult to put a value on it. You need to keep, have, as you said, a good reputation.
Is there still an online register of the HSE of those that they've prosecuted and what have you?
Yes, you can go into the HSE it's a kind of a name and shame thing, and you can find out who's been prosecuted during the last 5 years, and it's public domain stuff. There's no...
So you can just Google it.
Absolutely.
Right. So you wouldn't want your name coming up with a prohibition notice or something.
You definitely wouldn't want that, for sure. No.
Okay. Well, I guess the positive is that Health and Safety Expert can help. Health and Safety Expert 2015 can help. It's the edition that was specifically launched to handle CDM 2015 I know HSE wouldn't think of it this way, but I know a lot of builders think about the health and safety headache. It's something that they have to deal with, but they'd rather not. But it's a package that is suitable for residential construction work. It's massively extensive in terms of the documentation it can help you produce. So your company health and safety policy, and we talked about it before, the risk and cost assessments, of which there are significant number of in the software, which are automatically selected for you based on the types of projects that you're building. There's method statement templates in there for works that aren't really suited to the risk and cost assessment. So I don't know whether you've got anything to say, Dave, on when do you use a method statement over and above a risk assessment? Your portfolio.
Well, it would normally be described as anything that has particularly high risk values. So, something, for instance, where you might be working on a fairly busy road, or maybe an extreme example of working at height, or where you might be working in deep excavations or in a confined space.
Yeah.
So it takes it out of the realm of normal risk into high risk activity. Then method statement would come into play as a demonstration that you are carrying out a safe system of work.
Okay, so your risk and cost assessment should cover off a lot of, in most scenarios.
Sure.
And then the method statement template is there for those slightly more unusual scenarios. And of course, it will help you with your pre-construction information document. It will help you with your construction phase health and safety plan and the health and safety file, as well as
all those things. Yes.
It's got tons of other management documents. So site
inductions, one thing that isn't up there. Many others. Yes. Yeah.
And so on. Okay, so it does all of that really quickly and easily, simple to use. You just select the project type and it helps select the relevant documentation and then presents the templates for you for those that you need to populate with specific site information. So things like your construction phase health and safety plan, it gives you a series of questions about the project. You should put in the answers and it types up the whole document for you automatically. And it's obviously, in our view, pretty good value. No consultant fees or fines. With the software, you'll have everything in place. And if you'll have a look at the HBXL website, there's plenty of testimonials about how people are getting on with it. And one recent example of a customer, MJ Building Services Cornwall, who said that in the first year alone, he thought it saved him about £5,000 in consultant fees. And now it's saving him about £20,000 a year because he didn't have to hire an external assistant through the use of the software and other training that he's been on. So if you want to check out the website, it's hbxl.co.uk and there's the main number if you want to give us a shout. So thanks, Ed. Thanks, Dave.
Pleasure.
And hope you found this useful, people listening. Thank you.